Welcome, everybody. This week we have Deborah Neiman. Welcome, Deborah. I'm so glad to have you on the YouTube channel.
I'm excited.
Deborah is from the Thrifty Homesteader, and I love this idea for a blog. I didn't tell you this, Deborah, but I used to have 185 chickens. I used to raise chickens, so I'm not a stranger to homesteading. I'm a stranger to goats. Um,
Wow.
yeah, that was a fun journey. So I enjoy poking around on your blog. But can you share with us, for people who don't know you, a little bit about your journey? Because it didn't start in the same place that it is today.
No, I started back in 2006 as one of those old-fashioned bloggers who just had an online journal, and it was called Antiquity Oaks. It was named after our farm, and it was just all that, today a goat had twins and this is what happened, kind of a journal. And I had a fun little following, like I knew the people who were commenting and stuff. And then in 2010, I spoke at the very first Mother Earth News Fair ever. There was a publisher there who came up to me and asked if I'd ever thought about writing a book. And I was so excited because I was like, oh yeah, I'd love to write a memoir about, this fish out of water, city slicker, moving to the country. And she's like, well, it's really hard to sell a memoir from a celebrity who doesn't already have a big following. So, but we were thinking that you could write a book about the stuff you're speaking about at the conference. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, who says no when a publisher walks up to you and wants to give you a contract?
And that was about the goats, right? About the way the farm, what you were doing on the farm.
The first one was really general. It was called Homegrown and Handmade, and it had sections on gardening and orchards and backyard poultry and homegrown dairy and homegrown fiber, meaning sheep.
Wow.
Kind of fiber. And then the second book was Eco Thrifty, which was, I kind of called it like for people who want to live sustainably without the farm. And so it was super simple stuff that you could do. It's like, this is how to have a more sustainable life with your food. And we're not talking about buying the Amy's frozen dinner here. We're talking about having a
Like
garden
making
in your backyard.
sauerkraut or something like that.
Yeah, it was honestly a third of that book was food. And the editor even said, this book is really not balanced. It's 10 chapters, but a third of it's food. And I'm like, yeah, because people are, eating 3 times a day. It's a really big
That's
part
one
of
of the most important parts of homesteading is eating.
Yeah. So, if people can like start making their own cream soups, like I give you a cream soup base, so you can stop buying all the cans of Campbell's cream of fill in the blank,
Right.
So that was the second book. And then the third book was Raising Goats Naturally. And then 2 of those books have had revised and updated editions, which is basically like writing a whole nother book. And my last book was called Goats Giving Birth, which I pulled stories from that old Antiquity Oaks blog. And the stories about goats giving birth. And then I commented on them with my current knowledge. So it's like, well, this is what happened then. And this is what I would have changed. This is what was good. This is what would not have made a difference. And that kind of thing. Kind of like, here's your chance to look over my shoulder and see how I did things back then and how I would change it or do it differently now if I could.
So did your current blog launch during those, as you were writing those books?
Yeah. So when the publisher said, no memoir, we wanted to be a book, a prescriptive book on how to do these things, I realized that the Antiquity Oaks blog really was not going to be a good online platform for that kind of a book. So that was when I started what became Thrifty Homesteader. It started out with the world's longest URL.
I'm ready for this. I'm ready.
Homegrown and handmade the book.com.
Wow. The
I
internet was new back then.
Yeah, I did morning shows to promote the book, like sometimes authors do. And I remember some of them telling me, like, your URL is too long. It doesn't fit on our screen.
That's fantastic. So you wrote the books, you started that blog, and so you kind of moved from diary to something, maybe instead of this is what happened to me today, maybe something that was more that people could use as to help them if they were in that same situation on the farm.
Yeah, exactly. So the new one, which it was that super long name for a year, and then before the second book came out, which was Eco Thrifty, one of my followers actually came up with the name Thrifty Homesteader, and so it became Thrifty Homesteader. And it was all about like, this is how, very topical stuff, like, this is how you make mozzarella, this is how you make bread. um I did a lot of recipes back then, and as well as just other really kind of pretty basic stuff. I feel like, I'm in your SEO course, and I need to go retire a lot of old posts that
Uh,
they just don't work anymore, because they're not, they're like articles about using cloth diapers.
I use cloth diapers. I read
Making
100 articles about it when I clothed. I mean, that was 10 years ago, but I read 100 articles on it.
Yeah, and making your own baby food and stuff like that. Like there's articles like that on there that get pretty much no traffic, because that's not what
Do
Google
you,
thinks I'm doing now.
do you think that is that because you think because you kind of switch gears with what your niche is, or do you think is society just changing maybe?
A lot of it. So it's kind of funny. It never occurred to me that if I wrote a book on goats, everybody was suddenly going to see me as the goat expert. And that is exactly what happened, is that
Oh, so
people,
that was a happy accident then.
yeah, so it was a happy accident. I always say that I had to do all this research just to keep my goats alive. And by the time I figured out how to keep my goats alive, I had enough information to write over a 300-page book about raising goats.
Wow. So you've got the blog, you've got the books, and now I know you have courses too, a lot of different courses. I want to talk about that, but let's talk a little bit about the books first, because I think this is super interesting. So what we talked about a little offline is that those books really helped kind of spearhead your ability. You teach a class at UMass, an online class, and that kind of led you to the ability to get that job, which was a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Aside from that, do you think, was it a smart decision, like from authority perspective, or just a life experience, or a revenue generating, or was that the right approach? Would you do it again? Would you recommend it to other people?
So I was writing books, and I still want to write more books because I love writing books, which almost kind of sounds like I'm masochistic. um, but I really love writing. So in a previous life, I was a newspaper reporter, and I did freelance magazine writing. And so I just love to write. If somebody hates writing, then don't write a book. Like, it's not going to be fun. It's not a huge revenue generator. I mean, it depends on the topic that you're writing about, and it also depends on your audience, So if you've got an email list of 100,000 people, yeah, you'll make a lot of money. But for most people, like, books on homesteading can sell. I mean, in the publishing world, I mean, they're excited. Like, my very first book sold out the first print run in about 9 or 10 months. And the first print run was 5,000 copies. And my publisher was ecstatic, like, oh my gosh, this is so wonderful. Your book sold out that first print run. We're going back for another one. Because that doesn't always happen. And
Right.
so it was really exciting, and then it happened that fast. But when you look at the fact that the cover price on that book was $20, and I got 10% of wholesale, that was $1 per book that I was getting.
Wow. So
Um,
you have to love the process of writing a book to make it worthwhile. I mean,
yeah. And the thing is, because it all went so well, my publisher loved me. I turned everything in on time. I was easy to work with. By the time I saw my first royalty statement and realized how little money I was making, even though this book was selling great and exceeding expectations, I I had already signed the contract on the third book. And so
really? Oh,
I I was like way into writing. Like the second book was almost completely written because the publishing process is really pretty long. It's about a year-long process from the time that you sign the contract until it comes out.
wow.
So when that first book came out in September of 2011, I was already half done with my second book, and I had already signed the contract on the third one. So I
Wow.
was kind of depressed when I got my first royalty statement, which actually the first royalty statement then I did not get until like April of the next year. So by then we were already like done with editing the second book. And then I'm looking at my royalty statement going, oh my gosh, like, yeah, selling 5,000 books means I made $5,000. That's not much money.
Well, especially if you think about how much effort you put into it, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Well, and
exactly.
what if I'm just thinking out loud here, so tell me if this doesn't make sense. But so if you're writing for somebody else, then you can't repurpose that content. But if you had written and self-published, then you could have taken all of that content and also put it online. Is that true?
So I own the copyright. That's a
Oh, okay.
misconception. A lot of self-publishers try to make you think that you're selling your right to your work when you go with a traditional publisher. And that's only true if you're doing a work for hire. And that does not include royalties. That's where like, and I know people who've done that. Like they've, and this just blows me away. I would never sign a like never say like, oh yeah, I'll take $5,000 to write a book for you. Um, like your hope is always like, oh, in the long run, this book is going to sell enough that I'm going to make more money. And you do. Like I'm still, my last book came out in 2020. I'm still getting royalty checks twice a year, but it takes a while to make more money, because
Right.
and then luckily I have a publisher who keeps selling the books up front, not like when you walk into Barnes and Noble and you see all those books there by the front door that are like 80% off, those are called remainders. And the author is getting nothing because those books are being sold at below cost just to get them out of the warehouse. And I'm lucky that I don't have a publisher who does that. Like they because they publish only books on sustainability, so they are basically they're on a mission to help educate, to really educate people about sustainable living, and they will keep a book out there at full cover price in the stores for 5 or 6 years before they give up on it. So from that perspective, like I really love working with a small publisher. If you're working with somebody huge, one of the big five, or maybe it's down to big four now, they keep conglomerating. If you work with one of those really big New York City publishers, they don't sit around and wait that long.
Mhm.
They're like, yeah, this one's not selling so good. Let's just remainder it. And then that's it. That's the end of
Wow.
it. So
Okay. So if you're not making the cash from the book, even if it's worth doing, like, I mean, I don't ever think it's a bad idea if it feels good in your heart, right? If it's something you love and something you're passionate about, but it doesn't keep buying goat food, right?
right, yeah.
So you've got the blog, and you're making ad revenue from the blog too, right? So I imagine the blog helps sell the book. Does the book you get to mention the blog in the book? Does the book help push the blog?
Yeah, and I do. Oh, and that's where I was going with that a minute ago. I did, like, when my books first come out, I usually do excerpts like I'll pull 1,000 words from the book and I'll put that on my blog so that people can see that. And I'll do that multiple times, like, and at the bottom, then it says, this is an excerpt from this book, and there's a link to it where people can buy it. And then the other thing too is that I can buy the books from my publisher at wholesale. And so if I sell them on my Shopify site, I'm making more than, I'm making 50% instead of 10% because I'm buying them at
That's
wholesale.
huge. That's a lot. But
Yeah.
you just have to decide how much of a risk you want to take investing that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
So the other thing that you have are courses, a lot of different courses, which I think is fantastic. And you were saying that's one of your primary revenue streams. And I think a lot of times we have either bloggers who decide they want to make a course, or we have people who are course creators and create a blog to help drive traffic to the course. Where in your blogging career did you decide to create your first course, and how did you know it needed to be the same or different than the one you were teaching online?
So I kept thinking, when I realized I was not going to get rich writing books in this niche, I thought there's got to be a way for me to make money doing this, and so I started teaching for UMass online in 2013 when the first goat book came out. And that also is not a big money maker because you're just a little adjunct professor, teaching one class. And then I did pick up a chicken class a couple years later. Still, I mean, that's very part-time. And then I started thinking, well, if somebody takes a university class, it costs like $1,500. I could do an individual class for way less than that. And
keep all the money.
Yeah, exactly. And keep everything. Because there's a lot of people who don't want a degree. And that's what that course is. My UMass class is part of a degree program in sustainable agriculture. And I'm like, there's a lot of people who don't want a degree in sustainable agriculture. They just want to know how to take care of their goats. And so my first thought, I had so many silly thoughts. My first thought was I could just take my university course and just repackage it all and sell it individually. Thank goodness, before I had a chance to even launch that, I took a couple of courses from other people online and realized, oh my gosh, no, that will not work. Like when people are selling courses independently, they're not reading assignments. They're not, there's no assignments at all, And so then I'm like, oh, that's not going to work. And I was also teaching classes on my farm. And so my second attempt was I had my son walk around and videotape me when I taught a class. Well, the sound quality for that was not good because we didn't have a lapel mic or anything. And I was watching those videos and was really disappointed and was like, oh my gosh, I can't use these. And then I learned all about like, oh, this is what I really need to do. Put together some PowerPoints, do some lectures, and then just have some individual videos of me doing things with goats, that, and I also realized too, that when you're speaking in a live class, you waste a lot of words.
Oh yeah.
So,
I learned that as a homeschool mom. Like when I get ready to teach math, it's like 15 minutes and I'm like, we're done. It's 15 minutes and we're done.
Yeah. And so there was a lot of editing, and like, oh wow, like that thing that took me 20 minutes to describe, really should have only taken 5, but I wasted a lot of words when I did it in the live class. So the stuff got condensed down a lot more, which is good because nobody wants to waste time when they're watching online courses. So I finally got all this figured out. Somehow I discovered Teachable, put the courses on there. The other funny thing was I thought, oh, I'm just going to use my book as the outline for the course. And I discovered that once I started putting that all into PowerPoints and live videos and stuff, I had a lot of courses there.
Yeah, a
Like,
book is probably a good 10, 15, 20 classes.
yeah. So now I have, I've got separate courses. I've got goat basics, which is like your housing, fencing, buying goats and stuff, basic health stuff. And then I have a whole separate course on like goat diseases and illness and injury, another one on pregnancy, birth, and kidding, another one on nutrition, and then the fun ones, like making cheese and making soap and all that kind of stuff. So I wound up with a lot of courses. And
And you
once
said
I got,
that's become your primary revenue stream, right? The
yeah,
courses?
yeah, the courses are the primary revenue stream now.
And do you think the blog traffic is what drives the sales of those classes? I mean, is that one of the primary reasons for having a blog? Is it still just to write and to share information, or is
Yeah, it's all of the above, like it is still to write and share information because a ton of people just want free information. They don't want to buy anything. And that was why I finally broke down and put ads on my site 4 years ago.
Hmm.
Like I thought, oh, that's for people who can't get a book deal. And then when I realized, oh no, you're working back in the 20th century, sweetie. The books are not how you make your money with, um, you need to put ads on that. And I was so scared to put ads. I thought I was gonna get all kinds of hate mail. And I put ads on there 4 years ago. And to date, I have gotten 2 angry emails in 4 years from people who don't like the ads on my site.
But they still want stuff for free.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, and it's super easy to just ignore those people. I'm like, you know what? Nothing is free. If you don't want to buy my courses, there's no ads in my courses, they're
Right.
completely ad free. If you don't want to buy my courses, fine, stay on my website, but you're gonna have to scroll past some ads.
Yeah, and they're so unintrusive nowadays. I mean, I don't want the ad companies to hear this because I like making revenue off them, but your eyes just start to glance over them. You don't even see them anymore when you're reading.
I know.
Everywhere.
Yeah. It amazes me that we get paid what we do for the ads. I'm just like you. I'm like, I don't even see them anymore when I'm on other people's websites. My
Mm.
eyes are just going right over them. I'm like, okay, where's my next paragraph that I want to read?
So we were talking a little bit about this courses because I know a lot of people who are on our YouTube channel, they have courses also. I have a coaching course, and we were talking about how it's so much work and to sell a class, to launch a class, I do a 10-day, sales ramp up to launch my class with emails and 3 sets of webinars. It's a lot of work, but you don't have to do that much if you've got a blog bringing in that traffic. Would you agree with that? Is that why? I know you went through our course update, our blog post update course. I can only imagine you're looking to get more traffic so that you can sell more of your courses. Is that accurate?
Yeah, definitely. Because 86% of my traffic comes from Google. And
Wow.
so I need to do everything I can to make Google love me and send more people to me. And it's working. So I mean, my blog traffic is constantly increasing. And I
And
think,
you're seeing course sales increase from that. You told me you had 4 people sign up today. I mean, that's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. So it's really fun to like see a thing pop up that say somebody bought your course on goat nutrition today. I'm like, oh, yay. And I didn't have to like do a live webinar or anything, and I know that basically like they read an article on my website, because any article on my website, like all of my articles on my website that have anything to do with nutrition, there's a link to the nutrition course,
Right.
so you can spend a lot of time on my website listening to the podcasts where I interview professors on goat nutrition, different minerals and stuff. I have a lot of articles on there. or you can just buy the course and,
Get it
it
all
makes
really quickly.
yeah, get it
Ad
all in
free.
one, yeah, get it all in one nice, neat package, and ask questions, and I'm gonna respond to them quickly. And it's just it's quicker for people, it's easier for people, it's easier for me to be able to do that.
I
So yeah.
get questions of people saying, well, should I create a course even though that information's already on my site? And I think yes, because you are condensing it, you are making it easily digestible. There is no ads. I mean, certainly it's not exactly the same, but word for word for every single piece of it. But what would you say to that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like everything, really, so much of it is about accessibility. That when you create a course on something, it's all about putting the information in a really easy to access package. So
Like a
like if,
roadmap. No, you got to learn this first, and then you can learn this, and then you can learn that. But you can't get on a blog because it's all willy nilly.
yeah, and like yeah, you can be reading an article about selenium, and it may say something about, and then there may be something in there like, to learn more about copper, click here, and then you can go there. But you're just like chasing these rabbit holes, everywhere, like, oh, and then I want to learn about zinc. What about zinc? Oh, that symptom can be caused by zinc deficiency too. Okay, let me click on that and go to that. And so you're just bouncing all over the place, which is great for people who can't afford to buy a course, which all my courses are very affordable, by the way. They're all under $100 each, except for my goat birthing course, which I honestly feel like should be like $500 or something, because I spent hours and hours in a freezing barn with 3 different cameras, like trying to get all these different angles, like 3 different cameras in all these different places with these goats giving birth, trying to make sure that I got the right angle and stuff. I mean, there isn't anything else out there like my goat birthing course.
Wow.
Um, because it's like I'm over to like around 24, 25 births in there now, including a C-section. And it is a crazy amount of work, but that one even is only 197, and I'm always adding to it. Like last year we had that C-section, and I videotaped it and added it to the
But you would have
course.
had to sell 200 books to get that.
Yeah, exactly.
For one person to buy the course.
Yeah.
You're when you talk about the copper and zinc and C-sections, it makes me think about your original blog, your diary, and where you were sharing what was going on, but you kind of change course, where I'm sure you're still sharing what's going on in the farm, but you have a different perspective, that you're coming at it from more of a teacher, a service provider, as opposed to just kind of open book sharing my world. And I think when I talk to some people about SEO research or laying out a blog, a lot of times people who haven't done that in the past tend to think, well, I'm selling my soul to the devil by not doing this other format that feels true, which is usually that move from diary to service provider. Did you have that feeling? Do you regret it? What would you say to those people who are nervous about that transition?
Transitioning from like a journal type blog to more of a instructive kind of a blog,
Right.
it came really natural to me. I actually had major imposter syndrome. Like when the publisher asked me to write a book about this stuff, I was like, that to me just seemed crazy. Like, really? You think I'm an expert on this stuff?
Well, I've seen your blog now. You are an expert.
So at this point, I'm like, okay, yeah, I am. I get that. Because I spend so many hours now on stuff. And I interview, like for my podcast, especially, I'm interviewing vet professors every week almost on there. Sometimes it's goat business owners, but most of the interviews are with vet professors and researchers and stuff. And so I just feel like I was filling a really, really important niche because nobody out there is doing that. Everybody is saying, well, this is what I did when this happened to my goat, so you should do it too. And that doesn't work. Like every farm is different. And so if you follow what somebody else did and it works for you, you just got lucky. And when I was because the first few years I had goats, the way that I accidentally became a goat expert is that my goats were dying left and right. And the vets could not tell me why. And luckily, I was in graduate school getting a master's degree from 2006 to 2007. And so I was also teaching and teaching communication in college. And I had access to the university database. And so like a couple people gave me some ideas on what the problems could be. And so then I went to the scholarly database and started actually looking for research. And when I found the research, that is what saved my goats. And it was a lot of what people do, they just get lucky. You know, if somebody lives in Arizona and they're giving their goats a dewormer every month, they will sit there and go, I've been raising goats for 20 years and I give my goats a dewormer every month and there is no such thing as dewormer resistance. Well, no, actually, you live in a desert, so you don't need to give your goats dewormer at all. You're just wasting your money. If somebody lives in Georgia and they do what you do, their goats are all going to be dying from worms because the worms are going to become resistant to the dewormers you're using, just like we get antibiotic resistance.
Wow.
And so that's why, and that's what's really frustrating about, like, there's all these free Facebook groups out there. People are like, oh, just go to a free Facebook group. And it's like, there are Facebook groups run by people who think there's no such thing as dewormer resistance, which is just crazy. That's like saying there's no such thing as antibiotic resistance.
Right.
If you use any drug too frequently, it's not going to work anymore.
Right.
You know? And that is what happened to us. And it depends on how much rainfall you get, because the larva lives on the pasture and it can live on the pasture for months. Dehydration is its enemy. And so when a goat poops in the desert, the larva doesn't have a chance.
Right.
Like whereas if it poops in Georgia, and it's funny that you're from Georgia because the Southeast has the worst worm problems in the country because you guys get so much rain. Like you live in worm heaven.
Yes. And mosquito heaven. Yes. It's a foray of bugs of all types.
Yeah. And so the farther you get inland, like in Illinois, we still can have a lot of worm problems. And then there are some people who, like if you're in some areas and you have like Sericea lespedeza growing wild in your pastures, you're not going to have worm problems because that is a natural dewormer if the goats are eating it all day long every day. So like there's all this stuff, and if people don't know the why, then they just think that what they're doing, what I'm doing works. And it's like, no, it actually doesn't.
It works for you today, right this second, but maybe not tomorrow and maybe not for somebody else. That's so interesting. I think what I love about that is that you didn't just settle for the easy way to create a blog. You went deep and you're bringing, even though you live in Illinois, you made a way to share all that information with people, regardless of where they live, regardless of what their situation is, taking that service to the next level, which obviously is showing.
Yeah. And it's funny. There are people who, had goats for 10 years out west in the desert, and then they moved to the East Coast, and all of a sudden they have goats dying, like within months. They have goats dying from worms, and they contact me like, I don't understand this. I've been raising goats for 10 years. I don't never lost a goat to worms. And I'm like, yeah, that's because you lived in the desert. Like you were in the perfect place to be raising goats. So
It's crazy.
yeah.
So tell me, before I let you go, talk to me a little bit about your podcast and how that started and how that feeds into your blog and your books and your courses and all of that. Are you have you been doing it a long time? Has it been a good marketing tool for you?
The podcast has been fantastic. I started it in February of 2020, and as far as I know, there was only one other goat podcast that was
And what's
out
the
there,
name of it?
for the love of goats.
Okay, I'll put a link below.
And there was, as far as I know, there was only one other goat podcast out there when I started, and it was done by a vet. And she's not very consistent, which makes sense because she's a practicing vet, so she's
Right.
very busy. Um, and um, and it's funny because I did it because I kept hearing Pat Flynn talk about how you could reach a different audience with your podcast than you could with a blog or a YouTube channel, because there's just different people who listen to podcasts. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a podcast listener. I actually don't read blogs anymore. Um, and I'm not a YouTube person either. I am a podcast listener myself. And one of the things that slowed me down, and I'm just warning for anybody thinking who made this mistake like I did, every January I survey my readers on my blog and I ask them a lot of questions. And I had been asking them, do you want a podcast? And I was like, 20% were saying yes. It was like really low. Everything else was so much higher. It was like, more people wanted videos, more people wanted courses, more people wanted, more blog posts. They wanted more recipes. Like podcast was at the bottom in terms of how many people wanted it. And so I didn't do it for that reason. But then when I did it, I was blown away by how fast it grew. It started with just my followers, and so like the first day that the first podcast went out, I had like 100 downloads within hours. I was like, wow, this podcast thing is so easy, this is awesome. And then it just grew really fast, and I realized that I was getting people to the podcast who were not my readers.
Wow. So if you hadn't trusted your gut and gone ahead and done it anyway, wow.
Yeah. And so now I have a lot of people coming who find me through the podcast.
And then you're able to sell your courses. So is that how you monetize the effort for your podcast?
I do that. I also do some sponsored episodes,
Oh, okay.
and I'm really picky with my sponsored episodes. I generally approach somebody else and say, do you want to sponsor this episode? Because it fits you, like I did an episode on adding chickens to your goat farm and how chickens and goats can be a problem together. And so it seemed like a perfect sponsor for that episode would be a company that makes a portable electronet fence. And so I contacted them and said, you guys want to sponsor this episode? Because I can talk about, how your fence can help people avoid problems with their goats, like goats getting into the chicken grain and making themselves sick and things like that.
That's beautiful. That's perfect. Instead of just taking any, anything that randomly went together, or you were selecting it for that particular episode. I mean, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. And I have had like feed companies and stuff approach me and say, can we be a sponsor? And I'm like, could I talk to one of your nutritionists first? Because I have some questions about your formula.
Oh, that's amazing. So people know
And
they can trust you because of what they're not just what they're hearing, but what they're not hearing.
yeah. And nobody's ever done that. They're like, oh, sure. And then so it's like, I get contacted by somebody from marketing because I'm like, yeah, I've got some questions about your nutrient balance in this feed. So I would need to talk to one of your nutritionists to see why you've got this particular balance of nutrients. And the marketing person's always like, oh, sure. And then I never hear from them again. And so I'm just like, oh, well, that's fine.
Right.
Because I had a feeling it was gonna be a no unless they had a really good explanation for me.
Right. Right. Wow, that's fantastic. Well, what would you any words of advice that you would leave with people on about your journey and what's worked well and um just maybe how you could save somebody a stumbling block based on the career journey that you've had?
One thing I would do differently if I could, there's two things I would do differently if I could go back. One is I would have started an email list way sooner. I did not start an email list until about 6 years ago. And so I try not to think about how far ahead I would be in my business if I'd started an email list sooner than that. And then the other one is ads on the website. Like I think it's great that, that most companies like Mediavine have a threshold you have to cross, because I don't think people should have ads on their website before they've got a good following anyway, but putting ads on your site, because the thing is, by the time you start to get to the point where you're big enough that you qualify to have ads on your site, that also means you're going to need to be hiring people to help you. Like the first thing I did with my very first, because I got on Mediavine back when you only had to have 25,000 visitors. And the first thing I did with my very first paycheck for Mediavine, which was a whopping $400, was I hired somebody because my website was loading really slowly. And so I hired somebody to look at that, and he found out there was malware on my site. And I'm like, what do you mean? I am not that famous. Like, why would somebody put malware on my site? And he said, oh, it's nothing personal. There are just sick people in this world who create malware that just infects any old website, And so he got rid of it, and my traffic doubled to 50,000 within 2 months.
Right, because Google was like, oh, there you are.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like just being able to, and not to mention what a much better experience that is for the people who are on the website. They're not sitting there waiting 10, 15 seconds for a page to load.
That's really good advice. I think when I hired Kate, my editor, it made a world of difference. It freed me up to be able to offer more things to my audience too, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've got like a video editor, a podcast editor, a full-time assistant, and 2 people who help me with social media.
Oh my gosh.
And so, you get busy. And so it's like, it's not all profit. People look at a website and go, oh, what kind of expenses do you have? And the more you do, the more that you have to spend. And if you want to sleep, which I think is really important,
Yes, absolutely. You have to, even if it means making a little less money, it's the freedom. At least it's the freedom that draws me into this job. So
yeah, exactly. Because I used to work 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that was crazy.
yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, Deborah. I am inspired. I think some of the lessons I took away was I had 2 publishers come and ask me about publishing a book, and I said no both times, and I'm feeling really good about that because I don't have that desire to sit down and write a book just for the joy of it. And I think what I loved that you talked about was just that finding, I mean, not everybody's blogging about goats, but finding that unique way in whatever niche you're in, just to be different than the other people that are out there. Like how you went deep and got real, scientific evidence to support the things that you were saying. And I'm in travel. There's no scientific evidence going on about where you should go, but I can look harder at differentiating myself from the other people who are writing. And then I think the other thing was your classes. I'm just so intrigued by products and how maybe even for those people who are really nervous about doing a live launch or having to sell, if they can work the SEO magic on their blog and go that route. Now, do you sorry, we're wrapping up and then asking another question, but do you focus your content toward what your courses are? Do you think, okay, I need to sell some more cheese classes, what could I do? Or do you have an editorial calendar that's just based on what you think needs to be out there?
At this point, it is all based on SEO. I am constantly looking at different SEO tools and seeing what questions are people asking that I haven't answered, because I want to make sure I get the good information out there to answer the questions that people are asking. And I did not know anything about SEO when I was over 50,000 before I knew anything about SEO. And I think about that now, and on one hand, it seems like a miracle. Like, how on earth did I get to 50,000 knowing nothing about SEO? And then I realized I was actually kind of doing it accidentally. And that is that because I get a lot of emails from people and a lot of people asking questions on the blog. And my idea for writing blog posts was, if I have gotten the same question 2 or 3 times, that is now a blog post. So the next time somebody asks me that question, I can say, oh, here, check out this blog post. I go into a lot of detail on that topic.
I love that, which is another reason to have an email list. I mean, my audience emails me back all the time, and those are my favorite things. Those are my favorite questions.
Those are a lot of the best topics, are the ones that people are asking you. And if you go to Google and you go to your SEO tools, you're like, oh yeah, people are searching for this too.
Right.
Now and then I get surprised and I'm like, what? 40 people search for that a month? Why do I get so many questions about it?
Yeah, but then you never know. I have a post where the search volume was 70, but I get 100,000 page views in 2 months on that article. It just, because the tools aren't perfect too.
Yeah.
So, well, Deborah, thank you so much for sharing about your journey. It's so interesting to me. And I love your blog. I love your blog.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun chatting about this aspect of my business.
Absolutely. Thank you.